Hello everyone. Welcome on board to today's lecture. My name is Justin Okoli, and I am your guest lecturer for today. We will be covering what I believe is a crucial topic in the 21st century business environment, and that is business ethics. We'll be looking at the principles and practices of business ethics. At the end of today's lecture, I am hoping that you won't only be able to understand the construct of business ethics, what it means, its application, but also understand some of the challenges and controversies surrounding its practical application in real life. Secondly, we will be exploring some theoretical models and frameworks that underpin ethical issues in organizations. And finally, we will be shedding light on a key ethical issue that I think affects most global firms. And by that I mean companies that are largely internationalized. And that is ensuring that there is no inclusion of child labor across their supply chain. Okay, so we're going to start off this presentation with a reflection, and this would be your personal judgment. As one of the things to remember with ethics is there is no right or wrong. It's sometimes difficult to judge what is right or what is wrong, and that is one of the difference between it and law. So whereas there is a clear-cut notion of what you shouldn't be doing, in which case if you do that, it becomes illegal. But with ethics, it's a bit more controversial, and we're going to see why. So picture yourself walking down the corridor of a lecture theater, and you spotted a £50 note on the floor. What would you do? Keep the money, or maybe give it to the receptionist. But then, how sure are you that the receptionist would trace the owner? Okay? What if they decide to keep the money themselves? In which case, you are at loss. Do you want to give it to the police? Again, what is the probability that police would find the owner? But does anything change if you then realize that the money fell off a wallet with a name on it? Would it matter if it's a rich person or a poor person? So would you be inclined to give it to a poor person, but not so much inclined if it was a David Beckham or a Barack Obama or an Oprah Winfrey, for example? Okay. Would anything again change if you realize there is a camera somewhere, watching you? Now, this is a very simplistic way of exemplifying the complexity, the ambiguity, and the dynamism of ethical construct in real life. Okay, so keep your answers coming. What I've done is to design a Padlet, Blackboard Padlet. So just post your answers, click on this link and post your answers. Would look at that later on and collate your views collaboratively together. Right, let's have a closer look at business ethics. There is consensus in the literature that business ethics is a set of moral rules that govern how businesses operate, how they make decisions that affect not just themselves, but the wider stakeholders, and more specifically, how they treat their employees. But one thing to note, though, is that at the heart of business ethics, or any ethical decision for that matter, is your value system. So you can't take away ethics from the value system. Some organizations believe they are set out to, just make profit. Some believe they are set out to make their employees happy. Following the Richard Branson's philosophy, that if you have a happy employee, then you are in turn going to have a happy customer. Whatever your value propositions are, would definitely inform and influence your ethical behavior. And that is something very important to remember, because ethics itself is mostly influenced by your culture, business culture in this sense, your environment, your philosophy, your beliefs, your perception, and sometimes your network. But there's something quite interesting when it comes to agreeing around ethical standards. And there's been lots of debates around who makes that decision of what is right and what is wrong. And it becomes more complicated when we put into consideration cultural differences. So what is acceptable in certain culture becomes unacceptable in other culture. A good example of that is if you think about countries like Japan and some West African countries, gift giving is seen as a way to build trust in business relationship. Especially the ones that are intended to be long-term relationship. But this same thing can be misconstrued for bribery and corruption in certain countries like the US and the UK. All right, so let's look at some theoretical views that underpin business ethics. I know there has been some argument as to whether business ethics is a bigger umbrella to CSR, or whether CSR, is the umbrella in which business ethics is a segment. But wherever the case is, I like Carol's approach to CSR in the sense that she believes there are 4 key responsibilities an organization owe to the society in which they operate. And the first is economic. They have to stay profitable. And they have to obey rules and regulations binding the organization within their industry. And thirdly, they have to be ethical. They have to do good things. They have to be moral. And finally, they have to be discretionary. And this is about contributing in some ways to the good of the society. And the second theory here is the social contract theory, and the key thinker behind this is Donaldson. The argument here is that organizations cannot just be taken from a society. So if a society is making organizations profitable by buying their product, and if organizations are tapping their natural resources from a society, then they have to give something in return. And that exchange, according to Donaldson, should be binding, like a contract between both parties. And if you look at it in form of tacit contracts or psychological contracts, then it makes more sense. And the final theory we'll be considering for today is the Freeman's stakeholder theory. And this theory challenges the conventional shareholders view. And Freeman argues that companies should not only be responsible to their shareholders, and there are equally other stakeholders that needs to be taken care of. And this includes, for example, customers, suppliers, employees, government, shareholders, and competitors. So employees would expect a good place to work, a safe place to work from their employers. They would expect good reward system. They would expect job security, even though this is not always possible. Then in another sense, government would expect companies to pay their taxes, to obey laws, employment law, health and safety laws, etc. All right, one thing to mention here very quickly before we move on is that business ethics is not necessarily a destination. It's a continuum. It's a process. And every organization would be somewhere across this continuum. So if you think about it as a scale, so organization move, from 0 to 100, somewhere across that scale. So an organization can be an amoral business, and these are businesses that seek to win at all times, as long as they keep their shareholders happy. And a good example that comes to mind here is Enron. even if it means breaking the law. Sometimes they're happy to do that to stay profitable. The legalistic business are those who believe they are just set out to obey law, but nothing more than that. They're not ready to sacrifice or to be a social agent. And this is very much akin to Friedman's view. The third is the responsive business, and this accepts that being ethical may pay off, but they're not quite there yet. So they're developing protocols to becoming a fully ethical business. And the final is the ethical business. And it's very important to understand that this is where ethics is not just seen as a 100-page code of conduct that is lying somewhere on the internet. But this is where organizations are responsible to communicating the ethical practice to their employees and their stakeholders, and ensuring that everybody understands the core value of the organization. All right, a very quick exercise for you then. A manufacturing-based firm has consulted you to help them develop an ethical code of practice. So they know that they have to develop something. If you remember what we talked about here. So they are currently in the scale of responsive business, and they've contacted you to help them develop this code of practice that would move them to becoming a fully ethical business. But they are struggling to know what to include in that code of conduct. So what I want you to do is to work in pairs and decide what you would encourage that company to include in their code of conduct and why. Okay, so work in pair and develop a visually captivating ethical code of practice using a B5 leaflet. So it's going to come out as something like this. You would have enough time to work on this project, but just to mention it to you. So what I've done here is to thematize the key ethical issues into issues bordering around labor rights, environmental conditions, human rights, and poverty alleviation. I'm quite interested in child labor specifically, and this is something we'll be discussing in the next slide. Right, now we all know that globalization has done some phenomenal things, not just for organizations, but also for individuals. It's reduced the disruption of the transfer of labor, capital, and resources across boundaries. But equally, it's come with its price. And one of that is that multinational companies begin to lose sight of the ethical standards across their supply chain. And one of the issues I believe warrants critical investigation is child labor. I mean, think about denying a child of their childhood experience, denying a child of education just because they have to work. And these statistics from International Labour Organization, which is the latest they've got, is not positive as well. 218 million children between ages of 5 and 17 in employment worldwide, and 73 million of those in unsafe work conditions. And I think that is quite scary. And this is the breakdown of all of these across the globe. And it's not surprising that we can see big names like Primark, Nike, Foxconn, of course, Apple being alleged of using underage Chinese children who work long hours, breaking Chinese labor laws. Nestle, using underaged African children in countries like Ghana and Ivory Coast in harvesting cocoa. All of these, I believe, requires ethical investigation. All right, and this is the price to pay for either being ethical or not being ethical. But I encourage organizations to look at the positive side of things and make up their mind for themselves. It always pays to be ethical. Thank you for listening. This is my reference list in case you want to read further. Take care and bye for now.